It was a classic power play, really, delivered with this kind of casual frankness. The U.S. president laid his cards right on the table, smack in the middle of a trade dispute. He reminded Beijing, while they might have this stranglehold on rare earth magnets, America holds a different kind of leverage altogether. We're talking about the intricate parts, the really crucial bits that keep hundreds of Chinese passenger jets actually flying. He painted a pretty stark picture: 200 Boeing planes effectively grounded. Just like that. With the flick of a switch. I could have held them up, he said, but I didn't. A threat wrapped up in a favor, a very clear, very public reminder of a critical dependency. And for a moment, it seemed like an unassailable position in this high-stakes negotiation. But then, just as that threat was settling in, this new voice enters the conversation from thousands of miles away. While all eyes were on the Washington-Beijing standoff, a top official in Moscow made this, quiet, calculated offer. He said Russia was ready to step in. And he wasn't just talking hypotheticals either. No, he was talking specifics. Advanced composite wings, even powerful new engines, the very heart of an aircraft. So just as Washington threatened to take away China's wings, Russia was calmly offering to help them build a new pair. So our mission in this deep dive is really to unpack this fascinating high-stakes geopolitical drama playing out literally in the skies. Yeah. We'll explore how these global trade pressures aren't just, impacting economies. They're actively reshaping entire industries, forging unexpected alliances, and demanding new levels of resilience from everyone involved. I mean, everyone, from manufacturers right up to national governments.
Yeah, and what this situation truly highlights, I think, is just how deeply interconnected our world has become. It's incredible. A single statement from a head of state, and boom, you get these immediate complex ripples going right through global supply chains. It influences strategic decisions thousands of miles away almost instantly. We're delving into far more than just economics here. This directly touches upon national security, technological prowess, and frankly, the very fabric of international relations. It's really a prime illustration of how vulnerabilities in one area can be quickly exploited, or, conversely, lead to these surprising new partnerships that completely redefine global power dynamics.
Exactly. So in this deep dive, we'll be looking at the immediate impacts on aviation manufacturers, on airlines, the critical technological feasibility of these new proposed partnerships. Can they actually do it? And the broader long-term implications of using these vital supply chains as a kind of geopolitical leverage. We really want to look at this from multiple perspectives, from the factory floor where these components are precision engineered, all the way up to the highest levels of government where these strategic decisions are being made and, frankly, recessed all the time. Okay, let's start by dissecting this opening scenario properly. The U.S. president's move, explicitly reminding Beijing about America's control over crucial aircraft components for hundreds of Chinese passenger jets. That was a potent demonstration of leverage. He openly said he could have held them up, grounded 200 Boeings. What's the real power behind a threat like that?
Well, the power is immense. It really is. And it's rooted in the sheer complexity, the global interdependence of the aerospace supply chain. You've got critical components like advanced avionics systems, sophisticated engine parts, specialized materials. These are often sourced from a tiny number of highly specialized manufacturers, many of them Western. These aren't commodity parts you can just pick up anywhere. They're proprietary, they're high-tech, often subject to really stringent intellectual property controls. So without these intricate components, yes, entire national fleets of commercial aircraft can effectively be grounded. It's not an exaggeration. And the ramifications, they go way beyond just economic loss for airlines or manufacturers. It immediately impacts a nation's ability to transport its own people, its goods, and as we'll explore, it can have significant national security implications too, affecting both civilian and military logistics. This kind of vulnerability, once it's exposed like that, it demands an immediate, decisive, strategic response from any nation facing it.
Right. And we often hear about these high-level maneuvers in, abstract political terms, but they hit real people hard. We got a glimpse of this in the story of an aerospace engineer, Li Wei, working for Comac in Shanghai. For years, his whole career was focused on the C929, China's big dream, right? A wide-body jet to rival Boeing and Airbus. He spent countless late nights poring over designs, knowing full well that many critical components, engines, avionics, still depended on Western suppliers. So when the news broke about potential U.S. cuts to aircraft parts, apparently a real chill went through his office. The uncertainty wasn't just some political headline for him, it was the potential collapse of his life's work. Then this internal memo arrives about advancing talks with Russia for composite wings for the PD-35 engine. Now, it wasn't a perfect solution, obviously, but for Li Wei, it was a lifeline. It was a path forward for his project and for his nation's ambition. This story, for me, it isn't just about one engineer. It's a stark reminder that this kind of geopolitical pressure, it often backfires. It inadvertently accelerates the very self-sufficiency and the alliances it's trying to prevent. It's a real paradox of leverage, isn't it? What's your take on that, and how does that personal experience connect to China's bigger strategic picture?
That perspective is absolutely crucial because it highlights the immediate human driver behind these big national policy shifts. This kind of stark reminder of dependency, it inevitably forces a nation like China to respond strategically. And we see that articulated very clearly in their long-term economic vision, the dual circulation strategy. Now, this approach, which rarely came into public focus around 2020, was pretty directly conceived in response to these escalating U.S.-China trade conflicts and global disruptions like the pandemic. Its core aim is to bolster the domestic economy, make it the key pillar, that's the internal circulation part, while still actively engaging in international trade, the external circulation. The fundamental goal here is building resilience from within, making sure China's economic stability is less vulnerable to external pressures, to shocks. It's basically a recognition that the international trade environment has fundamentally changed, and China's older, export-heavy economic model might not be sustainable for a large, rapidly developing economy moving forward. It's about creating a robust domestic market and supply chain to buffer against all that global volatility.
Okay, so given this overarching dual circulation strategy, what are the implications for China's really ambitious aerospace goals and programs like Made in China 2025?
Well, the implications are profound. China's industrial policy, Made in China 2025, explicitly prioritizes sectors like aviation and space. These are seen as strategic pillars for national development, for global competitiveness. And we're already seeing concrete progress. Look at the C919, their domestically produced single-aisle jet. It debuted last spring, now has over 10 aircraft in operation. Impressively, it's received over 1,000 orders, mostly from Chinese airlines, yes, but there are plans for international expansion. Brunei, Brazil. This is a significant step towards their goal of challenging that established Western duopoly Boeing and Airbus in narrow-body aircraft. The next major undertaking is the C929, the wide-body jet, designed to seat 280 passengers for the ambitious range, 12,000 kilometers. That's intended to directly rival the long-haul aircraft from Boeing and Airbus. The concept for the C929 goes back to the early 2010s. Prototypes are reportedly already in production. First delivery, anticipated around 2028 or 2029 maybe. These programs aren't just about commercial aviation, you understand. They're integral to China's vision of technological self-reliance and geopolitical influence.
Right, so it's not simply about building a capable aircraft, then, is it? It seems it's also about gaining global acceptance, market access, which presents its own unique set of hurdles.
That's exactly right. The challenges extend deep into the geopolitical realm, far beyond just technical capabilities. Take the C919, for example. Despite its domestic success, its commercial orders, it's been stuck in the European certification process since 2017. Screenings are still ongoing, and an application hasn't even been submitted to the U.S. authorities. There was an official from Japan's Economy, Trade, and Industry Ministry who pretty candidly remarked that it's highly unlikely Western powers would grant swift permission to a rising rival, just like that. This really illustrates how deeply entwined a country's political power is with its ability to sell high-tech products, like aircraft, globally. It's not just about technical merit or safety standards, although those are crucial. It's about market access, geopolitical trust, the broader competitive landscape. So China is responding strategically to this reality. They're first aiming to gain operational experience, get sales in allied countries, or those with close geopolitical ties, Before then looking to expand sales into Western markets, they recognize the competition in this sector is heavily influenced by political factors. So they're building a track record where political resistance is lower, gradually accruing credibility before making a direct challenge to the established order.
Okay, so against this backdrop U.S. pressure, China's drive for self-reliance, Russia steps into the conversation, offering to help China build, essentially, a new pair of wings. And this brings us to a crucial twist in the narrative, because the reality of this alliance, well, it isn't as straightforward as it might have first appeared. What exactly was Russia offering, and what's the broader strategic significance behind that specific offer? We heard this fascinating snapshot recently about a veteran engineer, Dmitry, working at the Aviation Design Bureau in Perm, Russia. He spent over 40 years on aircraft engines, remembers the highs of Soviet aviation, the difficult rebuild after the 90s. For him, the PD-35 heavy engine isn't just machinery. It's a symbol of Russia's reclaimed engineering prowess. The news that Russia might offer the PD-35 to China for their C929 project apparently brought a quiet pride to his workshop. He saw it as more than just a sale, but a critical step in building a non-Western-centric aerospace ecosystem. Dmitri's story really underscores that deep sense of national pride, the ambition behind this. And that ambition was mirrored in the very specific offer we saw from Russian First Deputy Prime Minister Manturov, wasn't it? What was the strategic value there?
Absolutely. Dmitri's story perfectly highlights the deep historical and national pride invested in these technologies. It's palpable. And the offer from Manturov was indeed highly specific and deeply strategic. Russia was prepared to supply advanced composite wings and the powerful PD-35 heavy engine, which boasts an impressive thrust of 26 tons. These are crucial components, particularly for wide-body aircraft like China's C929. The composite wings were explicitly stated to be derived from Russia's MS-21 project. That's their new, domestically developed narrow-body airliner. It's a real testament to Russia's advancements in material science. The PD-35 engine, still under development, mind you, is intended for applications like military transport, future MS-21 variants. For China, these weren't just parts. They represented a critical potential pathway to reduce their reliance on Western technology for their C929 wide-body program. Russia was positioning itself as a crucial alternative supplier, a clear attempt to forge a non-Western aerospace ecosystem, giving both nations a way to potentially circumvent Western dominance in this critical sector.
Okay, so initially, Russia was stepping up, a crucial alternative supplier. But the dynamic of Sino-Russian cooperation seems to have, evolved quite significantly since that initial offer. What's the more recent picture? How has this partnership actually taken shape?
Yes, that's where the narrative becomes quite paradoxical. While the initial agreement for C929 collaboration back during President Putin's 2016 visit to China seemed to solidify this growing alliance, more recent reports suggest a significant, even abrupt, shift. By March 2025, it was reported that Sino-Russian cooperation on aviation engines just abruptly halted, stopped. Special titanium alloy parts, crucial for these engines, were reportedly blocked at Moscow customs, could be exported to China. Furthermore, the joint CR-929 wide-body aircraft project itself, completely suspended. China's apparent concern was that Russian involvement would make it exceedingly difficult to secure necessary Western components, which are still critical for the C929's broader system integration. And crucially, it would make it hard to sell the aircraft overseas because of lingering security concerns, Western sanctions on Russia. So this implies a pretty significant reassessment by China of the partnership's risks, where global market access and avoiding secondary sanctions have clearly taken precedence over immediate technological help from Russia. That no-limits friendship, so publicly celebrated just a few years ago, February 2022, appears to have soured, at least in this specific high-stakes aerospace sector.
Yet, despite these shifting partnership dynamics, it doesn't necessarily diminish Russia's own technical capabilities in aerospace, does it? I mean, the development of their own composite wing for the MS-21, that's quite impressive. It showcases formidable homegrown expertise.
Not at all. You're right. Despite the changes in the partnership with China, Russia has indeed made significant strides in achieving self-sufficiency in critical aerospace technologies. The MC-21's black wing, named for its carbon fiber composition, is a prime example of this indigenous capability. This component is now produced domestically at the Aero Composite facility, replacing previously imported materials that became unavailable due to Western sanctions imposed back in 2018. Composite materials make up a substantial portion, 30% to 50% of the MC-21's construction, and its wing alone accounts for 40% of the aircraft's bulk. That's significant. This makes the MC-21 the first narrow-body aircraft in its category to feature such an extensive composite wing, surpassing even earlier domestic designs.
Okay, and beyond the material science, what are the practical advantages, for the aircraft's performance, efficiency?
The benefits are substantial, actually. They impact both performance and cost efficiency. The composite design allows for a lightweight and aerodynamically advanced structure, which leads directly to significant fuel cost savings, specifically a 6% reduction. Now, that translates to over 11,000 tons of petroleum saved over an aircraft's operational life. That's not trivial. The MC-21's wing also boasts an impressive aspect ratio of 11.5, which is notably higher compared to the typical 8 or 9 you see for traditional aluminum wings. This enhanced aspect ratio directly contributes to improved aerodynamics, higher sustained speeds, and greater flight altitudes. In terms of production, Aerocomposite uses both traditional autoclave technology and advanced infusion technology. Their Uzhhorodsk plant is actually a leading enterprise in Russia for infusion technology, especially for these large wing box panels, using an automated carbon tape process. The domestic composite materials themselves were developed through collaboration between scientists from Moscow State University and Rosatom Corporation. And crucially, compressive tests conducted just back in March 2024 successfully verified the wing's high strength and safety, even under pressures exceeding 1.5 times the calculated threshold. This marked the complete replacement of imported composites with domestic ones. It really showcases a deep and robust indigenous capability in advanced component manufacturing, which remains a significant factor in the global aerospace landscape, regardless of its immediate application in joint projects, hashtag Tech 3. The volatile reality of weaponized supply chains.
Right. So whether this cooperation is fully on or off right now, the initial U.S. threat and Russia's counteroffer, they really illuminate a much larger and, frankly, more unsettling trend: the weaponization of critical supply chains. And this brings us to a crucial dimension of our discussion, because these high-level maneuvers, they have very real consequences far from the negotiating table. They impact individuals, businesses, in really profound ways. I came across this story online about a guy named Frank, owns a small family-run machine shop in Everett, Washington, not far from Boeing's factory. For 2 generations, his company specialized in manufacturing these high-grade fasteners and brackets for aircraft interiors. A significant chunk of his orders were for planes destined for Chinese airlines. He never really focused on geopolitics, just quality and making payroll for his 30-employee, Then the trade war hit, and weaponizing supply chains became this common phrase. His world just turned upside down. Orders delayed, then halted. Tariffs caused these wild fluctuations in raw material costs. He had to lay off 2 longtime employees. He posted something like, "I keep hearing that we're using our leverage in aircraft parts, but it feels like that leverage is being applied to my business, to my people." Frank's story really illustrates that when you weaponize one part of this intricate global web, the shockwaves travel in all directions, creating uncertainty, forcing painful decisions far from the intended target. It raises a critical question, doesn't it? How do you exert strategic pressure without hollowing out your own industrial base, without hurting the very people the policy is meant to protect? His story truly drives home that critical point. Economic coercion, whether it's practiced by the U.S. or China, creates significant, often unpredictable ripples right across the entire supply chain.
Indeed. Frank's experience perfectly encapsulates that. Perfectly. And economic coercion, as China itself has demonstrated with critical materials like gallium and germanium, creates significant, often unintended ripples. China accounts for nearly 100% of global gallium production, 70% of germanium, both vital for semiconductors, EVs, satellites. When China enacted export controls on these, it forced other nations into this process called de-risking, which is really a desperate effort to reduce supply chain dependence, seek alternative sources, often at much higher costs. However, merely playing defense, just trying to mitigate the pain of coercion, that doesn't really deter future acts. Some argue, and I think there's merit here, that a more assertive approach is needed, where like-minded countries form collective deterrence pacts. For instance, Japan and the U.S. could threaten to curtail silver powder exports to China. Together, they supply over 97% of global demand for solar panel production. Where Australia and Canada could act on nickel powders for rechargeable batteries, nearly 80% of China's global supply. Even Japan and Germany could control alloyed steel ingots for shipbuilding. Leaders from the G7, NATO, plus countries like Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, they recognize this. They've made collective statements about organizing to counter Chinese economic coercion, understanding that together they hold significant leverage over Beijing's high-dependence items. It's about collective action.
So this signals that the entire aerospace industry, from individual machine shops like Frank's right up to the major manufacturers, is having to scramble and adapt to this new turbulent reality. It's not business as usual anymore.
Absolutely not. The aerospace sector in particular is undergoing this profound, necessary transformation. The General Aviation Manufacturers Association, GAMA, highlighted this in a recent report to Congress. They pointed out the U.S. aerospace supply chain is acutely vulnerable. Labor shortages, critical material obstacles, supporting infrastructure issues. It's a highly interdependent global web, yes, but this reliance comes with significant risks, massive risks. Many vital raw materials, cobalt, titanium sponge, gallium, the U.S. aerospace industry is 100% import dependent on these, even rare earth elements, crucial for advanced aerospace systems, 90% to 95% sourced from China. This extensive global interdependence, coupled with the rising geopolitical uncertainty, it just renders the entire supply chain exceptionally fragile. Disruptions, whether from trade disputes, natural disasters, foreign invasions, they can quickly cascade, threaten the continuity of operations, impacting everything from commercial flights right through to defense readiness.
Wow. This sounds like a complete reevaluation of how companies operate then. They can't just rely on that efficient, just-in-time manufacturing anymore, can they? That model that's been foundational for decades.
That's a crucial distinction, yes. And it's driving a fundamental paradigm shift. You're absolutely right. The industry is being forced to move away from those lean, hyper-efficient, cost-optimized models towards prioritizing robustness and flexibility. It's a different mindset. This means adopting strategies like strategic stockpiling of critical components, which ties up capital, incurs storage costs. It means engaging with multiple suppliers for the same part to build redundancy, even if it means paying a premium for alternatives. It also involves investing in advanced analytics to forecast risks, simulate alternative sourcing paths. But these adjustments, they come with significant trade-offs. Let's be clear. Increased capital tied up in inventory, higher supplier management costs, potentially slower procurement cycles compared to the just-in-time model. Furthermore, disruptions also elevate the threat of counterfeit parts entering the supply chain. That's a huge safety concern, which then demands even more rigorous oversight, authentication, quality control to ensure safety performance. This structural realignment, moving from pure cost optimization to a kind of just-in-case resilience, is a direct and necessary consequence of global trade fragmentation and the increasing weaponization of economic interdependence. It's about being able to withstand unforeseen shocks and recover quickly, rather than just operating at the lowest possible cost. Hashtag MayaAV. The shifting sands of Sino-Russian relations.
Okay, so we began by discussing Russia's offer to China, seemingly solidifying an alliance in the face of Western pressure. But as we look deeper, the true dynamic of the Sino-Russian relationship, especially in aerospace and broader geopolitical context, appears far more complex, perhaps quite transactional, actually. How has this relationship truly evolved?
What's truly striking here is a rapid evolution, the speed of change. While back in February 2022, that $2 billion energy deal between Xi and Putin seemed to cement a no-limits friendship, even giving Putin confidence, some argue, for his actions in Ukraine. The long-term reality, particularly in high-tech sectors like aerospace, appears quite different. By March 2025, reports emerged at a significant rift. Those Russian titanium alloy parts for aviation engines, blocked from export to China and Moscow customs, and the joint CR929 wide-body aircraft project, completely suspended. This suggests a very clear Chinese reassessment of the partnership's risks. Beijing's primary concern seems to be the ability to secure Western components still indispensable for the C929's broader system, and critically, to sell the aircraft overseas without being hampered by those lingering security concerns and Western sanctions on Russia. This implies that China's self-interest, its interest in global market access, has taken precedence over some unconditional alliance, signaling a much more pragmatic rather than purely ideological approach to the partnership.
And Russia, for its part, also seems to be exploring new alignments. We've seen some intriguing signals suggesting a potential pivot towards the U.S., haven't we?
Indeed. There are some very intriguing reports suggesting Putin might be pivoting towards the U.S., potentially in response to warnings or perhaps suggestions from figures like Donald Trump, who publicly speculated that China might eye Russia's vast, sparsely populated lands, given its own crowded population, framing it as a natural enemy situation. Now, this potential pivot includes concrete offers from Russia, things like selling 2 million tons of aluminum and 100 tons of rare earth elements to the U.S. each year, at a significant 45% discount. Now, this would not only significantly bolster U.S. military production capabilities, potentially filling a substantial gap in crucial military aluminum and accelerating its Industry 4.0 and 5.0 advancements, but it would also directly impact China's strategic leverage with rare earths, undercutting them. Further signs, the sudden disappearance of routine China-Russia joint patrols in the Far East during early 2025. Those were previously a predictable fixture. There are also discussions reportedly of a major energy deal between Putin and Trump for Sakhalin oil. Now, that oil field is also the primary source for the Power Siberia 2 pipeline, which China spent over 20 years negotiating. If this U.S. deal materializes, you could see American capital flowing into that region, directly undermining China's long-term energy interests and its decades-long strategic investment in Siberian gas, its complex maneuvering.
Wow. Okay, so with these potential shifts and the perceived unreliability of their partner, how is China reacting? It sounds like they're having to strategize on multiple fronts, diplomatically, economically.
China's response has been remarkably multifaceted. It demonstrates a clear effort to hedge its bets, de-risk its international standing, especially with Europe. We've seen a dramatic shift in their stance on Ukraine. From initial silence, Beijing began providing humanitarian aid 4 batches, supporting post-war reconstruction, even calling for respect for Ukraine's territorial integrity. Xinhua News, China's state agency, reported extensively on living conditions in Kyiv, aligning China more closely with the EU's position. Back in February, China abstained from a UN General Assembly resolution condemning Russia, a notable departure from their previous pattern of support. There are even reports, perhaps unconfirmed, that China is secretly negotiating with the EU on peacekeeping forces. That would be a huge geopolitical realignment. Economically, Premier Li Qiang's 2025 work report emphasized ensuring the stability of China-Europe freight trains and exploring the Southern Corridor plan, that's a route through Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan that deliberately bypasses Russia. Now, this route, despite crossing a dozen countries, incurring higher costs, higher risks, is now considered a better alternative to dependence on Russia for freight transport to Europe. It signals China's willingness to absorb higher costs just for reduced geopolitical risk.
It certainly sounds like China is not only hedging its bets, but strategically asserting itself in areas that traditionally might have been considered Russian influence.
Precisely. China's growing influence in Central Asia is particularly notable, very significant. In 2024, China invested a staggering $9.7 billion in the 5 Central Asian countries. That's more than 3 times Russia's total investment in the region. Huawei, for example, now controls 80% of the 5G network in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, gaining significant control over vital communication infrastructure there. A new China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan railway is also being developed, directly bypassing Russia, connecting to Europe, another setback for Putin's strategic interests. And in the Russian Far East itself, Chinese companies have secured significant deals: port expansion rights in Vladivostok, timber extraction rights in the Amur region, a 60% majority stake in a rare earth mining project in Khabarovsk. Now, Putin may not publicly express frustration, but such growing Chinese influence in Russia's traditional spheres undoubtedly causes considerable concern behind the scenes. China also made a very opportunistic move, inviting Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to Beijing in September 2023. Not only flew him in on a special plane, but pledged $83 billion for rebuilding ports like Tartus and Aleppo. Now, these are both vital Russian assets in the Mediterranean. China's move clearly undermines Russia's strategic position there. It showcases China's assertive power projection.
And what about military cooperation? That was initially touted as such a key element of the No Limits partnership. Has that held up under scrutiny?
Militarily, well, China has indeed provided critical technology to Russia: satellite intelligence, communication equipment, aviation engine parts, drone components. The U.S. Department of Defense confirmed this, noting Chinese supplies quietly filled gaps. For instance, parts for Russia's Mi-17 helicopters, which faced severe shortages for propellers, turboshaft engines. However, and this is a big last, however, this is not extended to ammunition or heavy weapons, which has reportedly left Putin quite dissatisfied, especially when you contrast it with North Korea's more generous supplies, which apparently accounted for 30% of Russian artillery shells in early 2024. Economically, China has consistently demanded significant discounts on Russian oil, reportedly between 20% and 35%. Leveraging Russia's constrained position due to sanctions, limited buyers. Furthermore, those negotiations on the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, which took a decade to finalize, they stalled because China insisted on paying 40% less than the European market price for the gas. That's undoubtedly a major source of economic frustration for Putin. You also hear widespread Russian public complaints about the expense and poor quality of Chinese products.
Surveys in Moscow showed 73% of consumers complaining. Chinese banks, too, have been hesitant to engage extensively with Russia, fearing U.S. Treasury sanctions. Only 30–40% of trade was conducted in local currencies by early 2024, far from the 60% target. Beijing quickly pulled back from deeper ties after U.S. sanctions targeted Chinese companies involved in trade with Russia, demonstrating a clear prioritization of its own economic stability.
This raises a really profound question then. What's the long-term implication of this perceived unreliability, this increasingly transactional nature of the Sino-Russian relationship, for the broader geopolitical chessboard?
The implications are profound. They really shift the global power balance. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov explicitly stated, quote, "Russia will choose its partners based on its own interests," essentially signaling a purely transactional approach, no permanent alliances. The U.S. strategy here is reminiscent of Nixon's opening to China during the Cold War, isn't it? Aiming to pull Russia out of China's sphere, isolate Beijing. This could involve offering incentives, like lifting sanctions, in exchange for Russia curbing military tech exports to China. The New York Times reported secret meetings where the U.S. offered to ease sanctions if Russia reduced military technology cooperation with China, specifically mentioning things like S-500 missile systems, submarine stealth technology. Russia has also privately communicated with the G7 about reducing military tech cooperation with China if sanctions are eased. Now, this creates a serious concern for Beijing about potential strategic betrayal, a stab in the back, potentially, because any exposure of their deeper military cooperation could lead to devastating technological sanctions on critical areas like aircraft engines. China's military strength still lags the U.S., let's be clear. Direct confrontation isn't feasible. And Beijing recognizes the significant risks supporting an unreliable Russia while antagonizing the EU, its largest trading partner. Trade said to exceed 900 billion euros this year.
So essentially, China needs to prepare for a world where Russia might not be a steadfast, reliable ally, and may even opportunistically shift its allegiances.
Precisely. Beijing's strategy now seems squarely focused on stabilization, securing a ceasefire in Ukraine, diligently building ties with Europe to prevent further isolation, and carefully balancing its relations with Russia to prevent potential border issues, especially if Russia were to turn hostile. One Chinese expert reportedly remarked at an internal meeting, and this is telling, that China supported Russia because they thought Russia was reliable.
Yeah.
But Moscow could betray China at any moment, asking, why should we take that risk? That statement highlights a key reality. The honeymoon period between China and Russia, definitely over, replaced by cold, calculated self-interest on both sides. In this fluid environment, Beijing's overarching goal is to avoid being truly surrounded, as one scholar put it, surrounded by a potential U.S.-Russia reconciliation. So they're meticulously navigating this complex global stage to protect their own long-term interests and technological aspirations.
This has been an incredible deep dive. Just peeling back the layers on the complex, interconnected world of aerospace and geopolitics. With geopolitical turbulence clearly here to stay, what does this all mean? For you listening, for the wider aerospace industry. How are nations and industries responding to build genuine long-term resilience against such profound disruptions?
Well, this brings us to a crucial structural realignment happening right now within the aerospace industry. It's fundamental. There is a pronounced global shift towards onshoring, bringing production back home diversification, and what's increasingly being called friendshoring, sourcing components from allied or politically neutral countries. A prime example is Boeing. They proactively halted Russian titanium imports back in 2022 and have since partnered with U.S. suppliers like ATI Inc. or RMI Titanium. This isn't just a temporary measure. Boeing's substantial $24 billion stock offering was specifically aimed at bolstering supply chain security, signaling a long-term commitment to reducing dependency, building a more robust, diversified supply base. This shift away from purely global lowest-cost sourcing to more localized, secure supply chains. It carries significant implications. Potentially higher production costs? Yes. But it also promises greater stability in an unpredictable world.
Right. So it's not just about who you buy from, but also how you build things, isn't it? Innovation must be playing a huge role in fortifying this resilience strategy.
Absolutely. Innovation has proven to be a critical buffer against these disruptions. It's a cornerstone of future resilience. We're seeing rapid advancements in additive manufacturing, 3D printing. This allows companies like GE Aviation to produce complex parts, like fuel nozzles, literally on site, which significantly reduces reliance on long-distance logistics, external suppliers, makes the supply chain more localized, more agile. The global aerospace 3D printing market, in fact, is projected to grow at an impressive 29.3% compound annual growth rate through 2029. Huge growth. Alongside this, carbon fiber composites already making up 20% of Boeing's 787 Dreamliner are becoming even more prevalent because they improve fuel efficiency by 10–12%. That's a big deal for airlines. Digital tools are also revolutionizing operations. Digital twins, predictive maintenance analytics. These are helping extend the life of parts, optimize replacement schedules, thereby reducing immediate dependence on external supply chains by anticipating needs, proactively managing component life cycles. These technological shifts are all about building in flexibility and self-sufficiency at every stage. Production, maintenance, the whole life cycle.
And governments are clearly playing a huge role in trying to shore up these critical industries, recognizing their strategic importance for both economic stability and, of course, national security.
That's a crucial point. The Gamma Task Force report to Congress outlines key recommendations across several critical areas, and it reveals, really, two non-negotiable pillars for future aerospace resilience. First, an urgent, systemic overhaul of the talent pipeline, because without skilled hands, even the most advanced technology stays grounded. Simple as that. This includes accelerating data tracking for labor market info, increasing interagency collaboration, defining the FAA's role in workforce data collection, developing collaborative education, and establishing a national center for the advancement of aerospace, the NCAA. The U.S. House has already passed that twice. Furthermore, it means continued funding for aviation workforce development programs, encouraging registered apprenticeships, and even considering a return to defined benefit pension plans to improve retention in what is a highly competitive job market. These initiatives are vital to address an aging workforce, the Great Resignation effect, and intense competition for skilled technical talent.
Okay, so solving the people problem is central, absolutely critical. What about the physical materials? and the critical infrastructure that underpins the entire system.
Another critical area identified by Gamma is securing essential resources and modernizing our infrastructure. This involves fully funding the national defense stockpile, ensuring the strategic reserve of critical materials, improving access to essential minerals from diverse domestic and foreign sources. Policies driving restrictions on sourcing critical minerals, they need to reflect today's global market realities. And any transition to alternative supply chains has to be deliberate, strategic, incentivized for early adoption of risk mitigation. We also have to protect crucial aerospace spectrum allocations, especially bands like the X-band, vital for Earth observation data, weather monitoring, agriculture, national security. Preventing interference or reallocation of such spectrum is essential for operational safety. Furthermore, modernizing critical infrastructure, like the FAA's outdated air traffic control systems, is paramount, absolutely essential. This includes initiatives like integrating the Space Data Integrator, SDI, that's a system vital for real-time space traffic data.
And developing the NS Space Integration Capability, NSIC, which will help seamlessly manage the growing number of space launches and re-entries within our national airspace. These upgrades aren't just about efficiency. They're fundamentally about ensuring the safety and continuity of all aerospace activities in an increasingly crowded sky.
Yeah, it really sounds like the entire system needs a massive coordinated upgrade, top to bottom, to meet these new challenges.
It truly does. The task force also emphasized streamlining regulations and policy, preventing bottlenecks, fostering innovation. This means ensuring continuity of government funding for agencies like the FAA, which is heavily impacted by continuing resolutions, government shutdowns. It also means addressing policies that undermine competition in the defense industrial base, like Department of Defense acquisition policies that can inadvertently limit new suppliers. Swiftly implementing key provisions of the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 is also critical. And crucially, the report highlighted the urgent need to modernize the FAA's outdated paper-based systems. Move to robust digital platforms. The FAA currently relies on legacy technology, paper, or email transactional records, despite government mandates for digital transactions. Transitioning to robust digital platforms would not only improve efficiency, facilitate real-time data exchange, but also significantly reduce the risk of fraudulent activities associated with paper-based documentation. This shift toward digitalization is seen as a huge step toward overall supply chain resilience. Reducing costs, increasing efficiency by making information transparent and secure. Ultimately, the entire supply chain must be close to the market, optimize costs against uncertainty, be systematically optimized end-to-end, and build resilience by preparing for and rapidly recovering from shocks. That's the goal.
What an illuminating deep dive. Really getting into the complex, interconnected world of aerospace. We've seen how a single statement from a world leader can just set off this chain reaction, revealing deep dependencies, accelerating strategic shifts on a truly global scale. It's a testament, isn't it, to the intricate web that binds our modern world together.
Indeed. We've navigated the promises of new alliances, the paradoxes of shifting partnerships, from engineers on the factory floor diligently working on next-generation engines, right up to the highest echelons of government making decisions that affect national security itself. It's clear that the lines between trade, technology, and national security are more blurred than ever before, creating an environment where adaptability, strategic foresight are absolutely paramount.
Yeah, this isn't just a story about planes or parts, is it? It's a profound narrative about resilience, self-reliance, and the ongoing dance of global power. The aerospace sector, as we've explored today, is truly at the heart of these massive geopolitical forces, constantly adapting, innovating in response to an ever-changing world. It's a powerful reminder that in the global chessboard of critical supply chains, every single move has a ripple effect, shaping not just the economy, but the very sovereignty and future trajectories of nations.